Good morning. You're very welcome to this online launch of our report on the impact of the closure of day services for people with intellectual disabilities during the COVID period. Just a couple of acknowledgements to begin with. We'd like to thank our funders. We get funding through the scheme to support national organisations. It's government funding administered by Pobal, and it allows us to do this work. 346 people responded to the survey. That's what this report's about. It's your words. Thank you very much for partaking in the survey. Without you doing that, this report wouldn't be possible. And finally, I'd like to thank the staff in Inclusion Ireland who put together the survey itself to begin with and developed an easy read survey so people with intellectual disabilities could take part in the survey itself, and also then to take all of the information, which there were huge amounts of information, but to take all that, analyse it and come up with this report. So just to acknowledge all of those folks. So look, what we did, we were mindful that disability services had closed in March and that most people were not getting a service because of COVID-19. Obviously, there are a small amount of exceptions for folks with quite high support needs. They're still closed more than 3 months later. It's almost 4 months at this stage. So look, at the beginning of June, Inclusion Ireland did an online survey, and we wanted to know how the closure has affected you. As I've said already, 346 people answered the survey. 55 of those were people with intellectual disabilities themselves, responded to an easy read version, and 291 were family members. So once the survey is closed off, we wrote this report about what people said in the survey, and we're now this morning launching that report. We have sent it to the various government ministers and the HSE. Just so because there are actions in the report for them, we believe. So look, what you told us, and if you look at the graphic on the side there, it illustrates it. The support people got was very different depending on where they lived and what service was supporting them. So just more than half of people, I think it was 54% of people, got a very low level of support. That broke down into, in the mid-teens, 14% or so of people literally got no support whatsoever, and a small amount, 5%, were told that in the case of an emergency, I suppose such as somebody catching COVID-19, that the service provider would step in and provide support to them. And then just more than 30% of people were told, got a regular phone call, a weekly phone call, and I think a number of people said they felt that that was just a box ticking exercise. So that left about 46% of people got a slightly higher level of support, and that broke down again into just more than 20% of people got regular phone calls and support from staff in their service over the phone. 16% of people got online support through classes such as Zoom or Skype. And that entailed activities, such as Keep Fit, educational lessons, and learning various life skills, but done in a virtual manner. And a small amount of people, less than 10% of people, had what we're going to call in-person contact with staff. That meant that staff from the service called out to their house, or they had access to their disability day service where they were supported by staff, obviously within public health guidelines. And just to note that for the online types of support for people with high support needs, that made up about just over 20% of respondents. 20% of respondents indicated their family member's disability was so significant that they couldn't engage in any kind of online activities, even with the full support of the family. So look, we then asked how this made people feel, and there were some worrying indications here. So more than half of people with intellectual disabilities in the response to the survey, that was 56% of people indicated that they felt lonely. And then in family member responses, which made up the bulk of the responses to the survey, they said there was increases in loneliness and anxiety. those numbers were about 1/3 of people reported this. And there was also reports of people feeling withdrawn. The family members, and this was probably the most worrying finding of all, is that 38% of respondents said there was an increase in behaviours of concern in their family member with a disability. And there was also reports of increased instances of anger. And that was put down to the lack of support they've been getting over the last 3 months. On the flip side of that, 1/5 of people, it was actually 22% of people reported that their family member was actually happier at home. And of the responses from people with intellectual disabilities themselves, they reported that 30% of them felt happier at home. Now, this, however, in turn led to concern from the families that their family member might be reluctant to go back to their service, and had expressed a reluctance to go back to service provision once the COVID-19 period is over. So look, people, we asked people to rate what supports they thought were the most important now and as services reopen. Way out in terms of anything, the top 3 responses all were around direct in-person contact with staff. This was deemed to be very, very important, and that broke down into direct phone contact from staff within the disability service to support the family member over the phone. Also for staff from the service to call out and to support the person to engage in community services from their home, and also for the person to be able to access their disability service. As we said, there has been a little bit of that going on at present. For example, one of the responses indicated that their family member was being supported for 2 hours a week. Somebody from the service would call out to their home and take them down to collect their disability allowance at the local post office. For people with complex disabilities, the in-person type of support, it's the only form of support family members said would work here in these circumstances. And when we say people with complex disabilities, that's traditionally folks that would be referred to as having moderate, severe, profound intellectual disabilities, severe autism, that cohort of individuals. For some people, online activities through Zoom or Skype was deemed to be very important. They felt that accessing lessons online during the COVID period has worked quite well for them, and they'd like to continue that type of support. They also said it was important to meet friends and people they attend the service with on Zoom and Skype, and that helped with their loneliness. And just to note again that the online types of supports, they simply don't work for that 21 or so % of people who responded with complex disabilities. We also asked a question. We also asked a number of questions around respite and therapy services, and just to note, and that did show up in the responses as well, that not everybody receives these services. So before the lockdown, 123 people had access to respite, and 40 access to home support. During the lockdown period, only 15 people had access to respite and 16 to home support. And just to note that as well, a further 3 people said that they were offered respite but refused it for fears around COVID-19 when they seen what was happening in the nursing home sector. 130 people had access to at least one form of therapy support during the lockdown, before lockdown, and only 28 during lockdown. When we talk about therapy support, we're talking about speech and language therapy, occupational therapy, behavioural psychology, that kind of thing. And to show the importance, one family did respond and said that during the lockdown, the family member was demonstrating significant behaviours of concern. They were able to access a behavioural psychologist through telephone means, and that their support was able to give them the tools to work with their family member and reduce the behaviours of concern. So the telemedicine piece worked quite well in that circumstance. So in the report, what we want to happen is we want services to reopen, and there's a need for this to happen, and it needs to happen within the roadmap for reopening Ireland. That roadmap indicates educational and training facilities can open as of June 29th, obviously with public health guidance in place. And we note that as of yesterday, the HSE has issued guidance to services. We'd like to see this guidance implemented as soon as is possible, and for people to return to a full day service as soon as is possible, and for this to be in line with new directions, and not just back to the usual congregated levels of support. We want to see a return to respite and therapy and home support services in a safe manner, that this can be done. And as noted, therapy services, the vast majority of it can be delivered through virtual means, through Zoom, Skype, and all these new communication technologies that we've gotten very used to during the lockdown period. To support all of this and the return to safe services at full levels for people, the Minister for Health must make a special COVID fund available to support services to open to as many people as is possible. Because the HSE guidance at the minute is saying services will not be operating at full capacity. People will not be able to attend for the times they previously had done before. This needs to happen. People are telling us they're at breaking point. There's significant mental health difficulties. So the Minister needs to make a fund available. We're not sure yet whether that's the Minister for Health or Disability, because there still is no clarity on which one of those holds the budget. So whichever one holds the budget needs to make that funding available immediately, so services can return at the rates people had experienced before. And that fund, it would pay for extra buildings to be rented within the community, and this is probably something that needs to happen anyway in line with new directions, and people being supported from their homes, and safety measures that need to be put in, such as PPE and segregating of certain areas of rooms. There needs to be clear communication to families when and how services are reopening. This, while there is communication going on at the moment, there are no dates. There's none of this stuff is happening. It needs to happen. It needs to be very, very clear. People with disabilities need to be consulted about services reopening, what they're going to look like, what they want from their services. People are telling us that they're not that fond, and this is going back to the New Directions report. They're not that fond of large congregated services. Let's use this as an opportunity for more personalised, person-centred, community-based services. And the safety measures for all of this need to be set out. Look, during the COVID period, we'd love if you could stay in touch with us in Inclusion Ireland. This is the way you can do it. We have a regular newsletter going out if you'd like it. Into your inbox weekly. It's free. Please email us at info@Inclusion Ireland. We'll send it out to you. We're on social media. You can catch us there. You are doing at the moment. We've got regular updates going on there all the time. And just to return again, and look, thank you very much for your time in tuning in for what's a whistle-stop tour of this report. It is available on our website, www.inclusionireland.ie. And once again, look, just to thank the staff in Inclusion Ireland for putting this report together, and most importantly, the 55 people with intellectual disabilities and 291 family members who took the time to take our survey. This report wouldn't be possible without all of your inputs, and thank you very much.